You know how certain politicians and political persuasions and agendas, particularly of the green type, have led to our economy basically being on the verge of collapse? Well, guess what? Everyone who caused this problem is now blaming you. All those new servers at your favorite restaurant aren't just bad at waiting tables, they may wind up crashing the entire economy. Now, how long does it take for a waiter to bring you your order? How many boxes can one Amazon worker fill in an hour? How many articles can I write a month? Just how efficient are America's workers? Yeah, see, the problem isn't their policies, it's you're being lazy. Yep, they can never take responsibility. While these may seem like questions better suited to a performance evaluation meeting, the efficiency of workers has huge implications for the economy. Productivity growth, the change in how much workers produce in an hour, has collapsed in current year. If weak productivity continues, it will lead to higher costs, lower profit margins, ultimately higher inflation, essentially bad news for companies and the stock market. So, bad news for companies and the stock market. Yeah, never mind the workers, though. So, they keep getting like expectations on your average worker keep rising. The amount of pay they get for that, for the increasing expectations, is falling. And when they adjust to their new environment, they get blamed for the problem that their employer caused. Sure, efficiency drag. Labor productivity is measured simply as a total output per hour worked, but there is much more to it than that. Under the hood, the measure also accounts for things like composition of the workforce, workers' ages, indoctrination, as well as changes in the quality of the machinery, tech, and facilities workers have to use. The metric total factor productivity even adds the intangibles that are not embodied in other factors, such as economy-wide technological progress. In all, productivity helps us define how efficiently a society uses its resources and is an important signal to how quickly an economy will grow long term. Well, on the flip side, these are the same people that were growing a generation of communists that are anti-work. So the conservatives are starting to realize the reward for doing a good job is nothing but more work, so they're starting to drop down to the bare minimum. The left is already doing the bare minimum for the most part. They just expect someone else to pay their bills for simply existing. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. In the years before the pandemic, productivity was picking up. A tight labor market and increased competition for workers meant that firms invested more in their workforces. From current year -5 to -3, labor productivity growth increased 1.6% a year, more than double the pace of previous 3 years. Many have been hopeful about productivity gains in light of pandemic-era time-saving changes like white-collar employees working from home instead of commuting. So far, however, the labor productivity looks quite soft, and I see strong reasons to think it'll stay that way. A lot of this is because these boomers keep trying to force us back into an office. Right. On the output side, economic growth is looking weak. It was essentially flat in the first half of current year. When taking the average of gross domestic product and gross domestic income, and it doesn't look like much has improved in the third quarter. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's GDP Now tracker is projecting just 0.3% growth. Despite the sluggish economic growth, employment growth has not really blinked. Total hours worked have increased at a 2.7% annualized pace in current year. Non-farm payrolls have grown by an average of 438,000 a month. Wait, really? That's got to be for whole departments. That's not for individuals, obviously. Now, this combination of less growth and more worker hours means productivity has declined sharply. The two-quarter drops of 5.8% is the deepest on record. What's behind this drop? Yeah. Well, what did you guys screw up that you're trying to blame us for? Why don't you explain? And with productivity on the decline, the next question is obvious. Why are workers getting less efficient? What has changed that is making it so that employees need to use more hours to produce the same amount of output? Yeah, there's this thing called quiet quitting we were talking about. So employees are starting to learn that they gain nothing by working themselves to death for a thankless corporation that's going to lay them off as soon as it becomes convenient. So everyone has just shifted their mindsets. Like, if I'm going to work hard, it's going to be for my own projects that I own and I control. If I'm doing work for a corpo, I'm going to do exactly enough to meet my job requirements. No, nothing more. So the answer is twofold. First, there's been a lack of capital deepening, investments by business and productivity enhancing processes and tech. Capital deepening is straightforward, is when investment to robots, software, and machinery rises more quickly than labor hours worked. From 1990 to 2010, capital deepening was an important driver of strong productivity growth, but stalled for nearly a decade following the financial crisis. But in current year, -6, things started to turn around. Capital deepening added 0.7 percentage points to productivity. However, in current year, the contribution has tumbled to zero. There doesn't seem to be any reason to expect business investment to bounce back. Capital spending tends to follow economic outlook, and with a chance of a recession on the rise, we're already in one, companies will be reluctant to make big investments in new equipment or facilities. Now, this is good because they're also not going to be throwing their money away on ESG and other shit. All these activist investors are going to run out of money to do their activism. The latest regional manufacturing purchasing managers indexes, surveys of business managers in various regions across the country, offer a bleak outlook for productivity. Capital spending plans have been seriously curtailed. The second reason for the drastic fall in productivity is the state of America's labor market. Put simply, many workers don't know how to do their jobs very efficiently right now. Now, this part of it is them blaming us for what they caused, but a lot of it is, have you seen your average college graduate? This is finally college's bullshit coming back to bite us all. How many decades now have colleges been shitting out nothing but useless activists and getting worse and worse by the year? Well, now you look out and you see, well, all these college grads are fucking useless. There's too much churn in the job market. A little bit is good. Workers find a job that suits them better and get paid a bit more, and everyone wins. But right now, we have too much of a good thing. The quits rate remains higher than it has ever been. Now, you want to know why? Eventually, people figured out that if you stay with the same employer, chances are like you're not going to get raises, you're not going to get promotions. They're going to hire people from outside the company to higher level positions as opposed to promoting you. And how many of you guys have had to train your own new boss? Now, ain't that like just insults to injury right there? So you couldn't have just promoted me to that position. No, you had to hire some outsider, and then I had to teach them how to do their job. So these employees are starting to realize if they want any hope of advancement, they're going to have to just jump to a competitor. Like, legitimately, in the US anyway, the best way to rise through the ranks and the quickest way, like say you are a software engineer 1. Once you get the requisite experience for a software engineer 2, start applying for software engineer 2 jobs at other companies. And eventually, it might take months, might take a year or two. You'll eventually get accepted, and then boom, there's your promotion. You're making maybe $10,000 a year more. And then once you meet the requirements for software engineer 3, start the process again. If you stay at the same company, unless they're the rare few that actually do promote from within the company, you're just going to be stuck at the bottom. So when a worker quits one job and starts a new one, it takes time for them to learn the ropes, the ins and outs that make them more efficient and able to produce at the highest level. Now, this is a true statement. So as much as I like to complain, people keep asking me why I stay at my current job. And that's because I wrote like 2/3 of this code base. I know it inside and out. If I started a new job, it would take me way more time just to learn all the new shit. And I'd rather have the time. So at the same time, constant turnover means other employees have to take time to train and cover for their new coworkers. Also true. The airline industry is a very prominent example. New workers are trying to get up to speed. Older workers are spending more time training their new counterparts. That leads to slower boarding times, longer waits for luggage, and spotty customer service. Yeah, that's all businesses, man. Similarly, the workforce is getting younger, adding a crop of less experienced workers to the pool. A lot of them came from college, so they're just useless activists. The percentage of teenagers 16 to 19 years in the workforce is at its highest level in 10 years. Man, I got my first job at 14. Fucking scrubs. Now, while the participation rate for those ages 55 and over has declined, that's good. They're supposed to retire. Since February of current year minus two, the teen labor force has expanded by 364,000, while the labor force of those over the age of 55 has contracted by 560,000. Older, more experienced workers are on their way out as inexperienced workers come in. And while it's nice to see teens working as folks enjoying newfound labor power, it's foolish to argue that this trend doesn't have negative effects for productivity. Yeah, and also don't forget the role that culture and college play into this. Those older workers that are retiring, they were trained to do the job. Those who are replacing them are being trained to use their job for activism. Bad for companies, the economy, and stocks. Well, give us a reason to do our best work and maybe we'll do better. The slowdown in labor productivity have big implications for companies. This means the need to spend more on inputs and labor to produce the same amount. The higher input and labor costs squeeze profit margins. Companies don't like skinnier profit margins, so they will likely try to make up for the slow productivity in other ways, like high costs for consumers and cuts to other costs in areas. They could instead cut the fucking bloat. Think of how much money they could save. There's a difference between a margin squeeze driven primarily by higher compensation and one driven by weaker productivity. In the first scenario, firms can offset higher costs for workers by producing more, generating more revenue, and keeping things in equilibrium. When labor costs rise, workers aren't able to produce more to make up for that. Companies can't make up the shortfall. How many of these companies have useless trust and safety councils and diversity committees? You could save so much money. I don't want to hear this fucking bitching. Any of these companies that waste copious amounts of money on bloat have no rights to complain. Now, these productivity-produced problems for companies are not a welcome development for stock markets. I don't care about the stock market, if I'm being honest. The high labor costs are passed on to consumers, which will keep inflation higher for longer, forcing the Fed to continue to aggressively hike interest rates, which in turn dampens the outlook for the market. And if firms try to save costs by letting go of unproductive workers, total incomes will slow and fewer households will have the cash to continue spending. Higher rates for longer and weaker consumer spending can add up to one thing: a recession. Stock markets don't do well in recessions. So, you slave, you need to dedicate 80 hours a week instead of 40 to your job for the greater good, while all that extra work is just used to keep the bloat employed. Yeah, how about we just get rid of the bloat? Especially in these big companies. Like, man, I've worked in an environment like that before where there was 30 people in the department, but only like 5 of them were actually needed. Everyone else was just getting in the way. You would think this would be a manager's wet dream, trying to explain to them, hey, if you just get rid of these people, not only are you going to lower your expenses, but productivity will actually go up as well. You would think a manager would bust a nut hearing that, but no, we can't do that. Instead, they fire the 5 people keeping the place afloat and wonder why it collapsed.